The morning Helen Crawford woke up to change the course of human history started like any other morning. She was drinking coffee in her quarters aboard the Earth defense ship Vigilant when the alarm sounded. It was not a drill. The sensors had picked up something massive at the edge of the solar system, something that should not be there. Helen put down her cup and walked to the bridge. She had been an admiral in Earth's defense fleet for 12 years. She had trained for this moment her entire career. First contact with alien life. But as the data came through on the main screen, she felt her stomach drop. This was not a peaceful greeting. 200 warships had just appeared near Neptune. They were not hiding. They were not asking permission. They were positioned like an invasion force. The communications officer turned to face her. Her name was Lisa Brooks, and she looked pale. Lisa had intercepted a transmission from the alien fleet. It was being broadcast on all frequencies. The message was being translated by the ship's computer. Helen read it twice to make sure she understood. The aliens called themselves the Zulkran Dominion. They had ruled their part of the galaxy for 3,000 years. They were giving humanity 72 hours to surrender completely. If Earth refused, they would destroy every human city and military installation. There would be no negotiation. There would be no second chance. Helen ordered Lisa to send the message to Earth Command immediately. Then she looked at the tactical display. The Vigilant was a good ship with a good crew, but it was just one vessel. Earth's entire fleet consisted of 43 ships. The aliens had 200. Even worse, the scans showed that each alien ship was larger and more powerful than anything humans had built. This was not a fight Earth could win with force. Down on Earth, in a military command center beneath Geneva, Danny Carter received the alien message. Danny was a commander in Earth's strategic division. He was not the kind of officer who shouted orders or led troops into battle. Danny was the kind of officer who sat in quiet rooms and studied patterns. He had spent 20 years analyzing human military history. He knew every famous battle from ancient times to the present. He understood how smaller forces had defeated larger ones throughout history. Now he had 72 hours to figure out how to do it again. Danny called an emergency meeting with Earth's Defense Council. The room was full of generals and politicians who all had the same question. How could Earth possibly fight an enemy with such overwhelming power? Danny listened to them argue for an hour. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Some wanted to fight even though they knew it was hopeless. Some wanted to try running and hiding in deep space. Danny waited until they were all tired of talking. Then he spoke. He told them about a battle that happened thousands of years ago. A small army had faced a much larger enemy. The small army knew they could not win in a direct fight. So they changed the rules. They made the enemy think they were weak and foolish. They made the enemy overconfident. Then they used tricks and tactics the enemy never expected. They won not because they were stronger, but because they were smarter. Danny said humanity needed to do the same thing. They needed to make the Zulkran think humans were exactly what they expected. Primitive and panicking and easy to defeat. Then they needed to prove them wrong. The council members looked at each other. One of them asked Danny if he really thought it could work. Danny said he did not know, but he knew that trying to fight the Zulkran the way the aliens expected would definitely fail. At least his way gave them a chance. The council voted. They would follow Danny's plan. Back in space, Helen Crawford received her orders. She was to take the Vigilant and several other ships and make contact with the alien fleet. Not to surrender, not to negotiate, but to show force. To make the aliens think Earth was going to fight them in a traditional battle. Helen understood immediately. This was the first move in Danny's strategy. Make the enemy believe they had already won. She called her best captain to the bridge. His name was Greg Mason, and he commanded a fast attack ship called the Defiant. Helen gave him his mission. Take a squadron out to Jupiter. Engage the alien scout ships there. Make it look aggressive but disorganized. Make it look like humanity was desperate and making mistakes. Then retreat. Make the aliens chase them. Make the aliens think Earth's forces were poorly trained and easy to beat. Greg smiled when he heard the plan. He had served under Helen for 8 years. He trusted her completely. He took his squadron and headed for Jupiter. The encounter happened exactly as planned. Greg's ships made aggressive runs at the alien pickets. They fired their weapons, but their attack patterns seemed random and poorly coordinated. The Zulkran ships barely had to move to avoid the human attacks. Then Greg ordered a messy retreat. His ships scattered in different directions as if they were panicking. The Zulkran commanders watched and laughed. They sent reports back to their supreme commander. The humans were weak. The humans were frightened. This would be easier than expected. Supreme Commander Vrath received those reports in his flagship. He was a veteran of 50 campaigns. He had conquered 20 worlds for the Dominion. He had never lost a battle. He read the reports about the human attack at Jupiter and felt nothing but contempt. These humans were like all the other primitive species he had crushed. They had basic technology but no real understanding of warfare. They thought aggression and courage could overcome superior firepower. They were wrong. They always were. Vrath ordered his fleet to advance toward Earth. He divided his 200 ships into 3 battle groups. They would approach from different angles and overwhelm the human defenses. It was a standard tactic. It had worked 100 times before. It would work again. He gave his fleet 1 week to completely conquer the human homeworld. His officers assured him they would need less time than that. What Vrath did not know was that while he watched the clumsy human attack at Jupiter, another human ship was moving through the asteroid belt. The pilot was a young lieutenant named Amy Sullivan. Her ship was small and equipped with experimental stealth technology. The Zalkran sensors could not detect her. Amy was deploying dozens of automated drones throughout the solar system. Each drone was a sensor package that transmitted data on frequencies the aliens did not monitor. The drones created an invisible network. Every Zalkran ship that moved through the solar system was being watched. Every communication they sent was being intercepted. Every formation they made was being recorded. Back in Geneva, Danny Carter sat in front of a wall of screens. Data was flowing in from Amy's drone network. He could see the entire Zalkran fleet. He could see how they moved. He could see their patterns. He could see their communications. And most importantly, he could see their weakness. The Zalkran followed rigid military doctrine. They did everything by the book. They never adapted. They never improvised. They assumed their way of fighting was the only way that mattered. Danny smiled. He had fought enemies like this before in his studies. Enemies who were strong but predictable. Enemies who could be beaten if you refused to fight on their terms. The real battle was about to begin. Danny Carter stood in the command center staring at the tactical display. The Zalkran fleet was advancing exactly as he predicted, 3 battle groups moving in formation toward Earth. They were not trying to hide. They were not changing their approach. They believed they had already won. Danny had spent the last 48 hours building a plan based on one simple idea. Make the enemy so confident that they stopped thinking carefully. Make them believe the battle was over before it really began, then hit them with something they never saw coming. He called a meeting with his key officers. Helen Crawford joined by video link from the Vigilant. Greg Mason was there after returning from Jupiter. Kevin Torres arrived from the mining station on Ceres. Nicole Wright flew in from the lunar base. Danny spread out his plan on the table. It was complex, but the core was simple. Earth could not match the Zalkran in firepower. So they would not try. Instead, they would make the aliens confused and uncertain. They would make the Zalkran doubt their own sensors. They would make the enemy fleet slow down and second-guess every decision. Kevin Torres listened carefully. He commanded a fleet of mining ships that harvested asteroids for resources. His ships were not warships. They were slow and awkward and built for hauling ore. But Danny had a job for them. Kevin's mining ships would deploy thousands of small drones throughout the inner solar system. Each drone was cheap to build. Each one had reflective panels and a small power source. Each one was programmed to broadcast an energy signature that looked exactly like a human warship. When the Zalkran sensors picked them up, they would think Earth had thousands of ships, not 43,000s. Kevin understood immediately. He asked how long he had to deploy the drones. Danny said 60 hours. Kevin said it would be tight, but his crews could do it. They had been building the drones in secret for weeks. Ever since Earth first detected the Zalkran scout ships months ago, the drones were already loaded on his mining vessels. All Kevin had to do was spread them across the solar system in the right pattern. Nicole Wright had a different assignment. She commanded a special operations team trained for boarding actions and sabotage. Danny needed her to get close to the Zalkran fleet, close enough to touch their ships. Nicole looked at him like he was crazy. The Zalkran would destroy any military ship that approached them. Danny agreed. That was why Nicole would not be flying a military ship. She would be flying civilian transports, ships that broadcast surrender signals. Ships that the Zalkrin would allow to approach because they thought those ships were giving up. Nicole asked what would happen once she got close. Danny explained that Earth's best computer experts had created a special virus. It was not designed to destroy Zalkrin systems. It was designed to confuse them. The virus would create false orders. It would delay communications between ships. It would make sensor readings unreliable. It would turn the Zalkrin fleet's own technology against them. But someone had to upload the virus directly into their network. That someone was Nicole and her team. Greg Mason already knew his role. He would continue making aggressive attacks that looked poorly planned. He would keep the Zalkrin commanders focused on what they expected to see. Desperate human forces making stupid mistakes. While everyone watched Greg's ships, the real work would happen in the background. The drones would spread. Nicole would approach. Amy Sullivan's sensor network would track every alien movement. The trap would close slowly. So slowly the Zalkrin would not notice until it was too late. Helen Crawford asked the question everyone was thinking. What if it did not work? What if the Zalkrin saw through the deception? What if they just ignored all the tricks and attacked Earth directly with overwhelming force? Danny admitted that was possible. But he pointed out that the Zalkrin had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years using the same tactics. They had never lost because no one had ever made them think differently. Their strength was also their weakness. They could not imagine a fight that did not follow their rules. The meeting ended. Each officer returned to their ships to begin their assignments. Kevin Torres took his mining fleet and started deploying drones. He placed them carefully along the routes the Zalkrin would most likely use. He programmed each drone to activate at different times. When the Zalkrin sensors swept the area, they would see new ships appearing constantly. It would look like Earth was bringing in reinforcements from deep space. Hundreds of ships. Then thousands. The numbers would not make sense, but the sensors would say they were real. Nicole Wright gathered her team on the lunar base. She had 20 specialists. Computer hackers, electronics experts, combat pilots, people who could think fast and adapt to chaos. She explained the mission. They would fly 5 civilian transport ships toward the Zalkrin fleet. Each ship would broadcast surrender messages. The messages would say that these ships carried civilians who wanted to leave Earth before the fighting started. The Zalkrin would probably let them approach. Most conquering species allowed refugees to flee. It made the invasion easier. But Nicole's ships would not be carrying civilians. They would be carrying the most sophisticated computer warfare packages Earth had ever built. When they got close enough to the Zalkrin fleet, they would release thousands of tiny communication bots. Each bot would attach itself to a Zalkrin ship's hull. Each bot would hack into the ship's external communication arrays. Then they would upload the virus. If everything worked, the Zalkrin would not notice anything wrong for hours. Maybe days. By then, the virus would be spreading through their entire fleet. One of Nicole's team members asked what would happen if the Zalkrin searched their ships before letting them approach. Nicole said they would have to fight their way out. The transports had hidden weapons, not enough to win a battle, but enough to cover and escape. She said it probably would not come to that. The Zalkrin were arrogant. They would not waste time carefully searching refugee ships. They would wave them through and forget about them. Greg Mason took the Defiant and his squadron back into space. His orders were to be visible and loud. He approached the closest Zalkrin battle group and made another attack run. This time he aimed for their supply ships at the back of the formation. He knew he could not destroy them, but that was not the point. The point was to make the Zalkrin angry, make them chase him, keep their attention focused on the obvious threat while everyone else did the real work. The Zalkrin commanders took the bait. They sent 12 ships after Greg's squadron. Greg led them on a chase through the asteroid belt. His ships were faster and more maneuverable. He dodged between asteroids and made the Zalkrin work for every shot. After 2 hours, he broke off and retreated toward Mars. The Zalkrin ships returned to their fleet. Their commanders sent another report to Supreme Commander Vrath. The humans were making more desperate attacks. They were accomplishing nothing. Victory would come soon. Vrath read the reports and felt satisfied. Everything was going according to plan. His fleet was advancing steadily. The humans were panicking and wasting their strength on pointless attacks. In 3 more days, his ships would reach Earth orbit. Then the real bombardment would begin. He did not know that while he read those reports, Kevin's drones were spreading across the solar system. He did not know that Nicole's transport ships were preparing to launch. He did not know that every move his fleet made was being tracked and analyzed by Danny Carter. Amy Sullivan continued her silent work in the asteroid belt. Her stealth ship had deployed all its sensor drones. Now she was collecting data. She watched the Zulkran fleet move. She recorded their communication patterns. She noticed something interesting. The Zulkran used old-fashioned radio communications. They did not encrypt most of their signals. They assumed no primitive species could understand their language or intercept their transmissions. Earth's computers had cracked the Zulkran language in the first 6 hours. Now Amy could listen to every order, every report, every casual conversation between Zulkran officers. She sent all of it back to Danny. Danny sat in Geneva reading translated Zulkran communications. He learned how their command structure worked. He learned which officers were cautious and which ones were aggressive. He learned that Supreme Commander Vrath had promised his Emperor a quick victory. Vrath was under pressure to finish this conquest fast and move on to the next target. That pressure would make him impatient. Impatient commanders made mistakes. Danny planned to give Vrath every reason to rush forward without thinking. The stage was set. The actors were in position. Now they just had to perform their roles perfectly. One mistake would cost humanity everything. The Zulkran fleet was 3 days into their advance when the first strange readings appeared on their sensors. A Zulkran cruiser near Saturn detected 30 human ships where there had been empty space an hour before. The cruiser captain reported it to his battle group commander. The commander ordered a second scan. The sensors confirmed it. 30 ships, all broadcasting human signatures. The commander sent the report up the chain of command and ordered his ships to change course toward the new contacts. Supreme Commander Vrath received the report in his flagship. He studied it carefully. 30 more human ships. That brought Earth's total fleet to over 70 vessels, still far less than his 200. But where had these ships come from? Earth did not have secret shipyards in the outer system. His scouts would have detected them months ago. Unless the humans had been hiding ships in deep space, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. Vrath ordered his fleet to proceed with caution. He divided his forces to investigate the new contacts while maintaining the advance toward Earth. 6 hours later, another report arrived. This time from a battle group near Jupiter. They detected 50 human ships. Then another report came from the third battle group. 40 ships detected near the asteroid belt. Vrath stood on his bridge trying to make sense of the numbers. Earth now appeared to have nearly 200 ships. That matched his own fleet. But intelligence reports had been clear. Earth only had 43 warships. Something was wrong. Either Earth had been hiding a massive fleet for years, or the sensors were malfunctioning. Vrath ordered his technical officers to check all sensor systems. They ran diagnostics for 3 hours. Everything checked out. The sensors were working perfectly. The ships they detected were real. They had mass. They had energy signatures. They matched human technology profiles. Vrath made a decision. He ordered his fleet to stop advancing and regroup. He needed to understand what he was facing before moving closer to Earth. It was the first time in his career that he had paused an invasion. His officers looked at him with surprise. Vrath ignored them. Something felt wrong about this situation. In Geneva, Danny Carter watched the Zulkran fleet slow down and stop. He smiled. Kevin's drones were working perfectly. The Zulkran were seeing exactly what Danny wanted them to see. A human fleet that made no sense. Numbers that did not add up. It would make them cautious. It would make them hesitate. Every hour they wasted was another hour for Earth to prepare the next phase. Nicole Wright sat in the pilot seat of a civilian transport ship. Behind her were 4 more transports. Each one carried 5 members of her team and the computer warfare packages they needed. The 5 ships left lunar orbit and began broadcasting on all frequencies. The message was simple. They were civilian vessels requesting safe passage out of the solar system. They carried families who wanted to escape before the war destroyed everything. Please let them pass. They were not a threat. They just wanted to live. The message reached the nearest Zulkran battle group within minutes. The group commander listened to it and laughed. More proof that the humans were broken and afraid. Their civilians were already fleeing. He granted permission for the 5 transports to approach his fleet. He would let them pass through his lines and continue into deep space. It did not matter. In a few days, there would be nowhere for humans to run. The entire species would be under Zulkran control. Nicole's transport approached the Zalkran fleet slowly. She kept her hands steady on the controls even though her heart was pounding. Her ship was surrounded by massive alien warships. Any one of them could destroy her transport with a single shot. She flew past a Zalkran cruiser so close she could see the details of its hull. The alien ship ignored her. Just another frightened refugee running away. Nicole reached the center of the Zalkran formation and gave the signal to her team. All 5 transports opened their cargo bays at the same moment. Thousands of tiny bots poured out into space. Each bot was the size of a coin. Each one had a small thruster and a magnetic clamp. The bots spread out in every direction. They moved toward the nearest Zalkran ships and attached themselves to the hulls. The Zalkran sensors did not detect them. The bots were too small and moved too slowly. Within 10 minutes, over 3,000 bots had attached themselves to 40 different Zalkran ships. Nicole's team activated the bots remotely. Each bot extended a thin wire into the Zalkran ship's external communication array. Then they began uploading the virus. The process took less than a minute per ship. The virus was small and designed to hide itself in normal system traffic. It would not trigger any alarms. It would not destroy anything. It would simply wait and spread. When enough copies existed throughout the Zalkran network, it would activate. Then the real fun would begin. Nicole pulled her transport away from the Zalkran fleet. She continued broadcasting her refugee message. The Zalkran waved her through without question. Her 5 ships flew past the alien lines and then curved back toward Earth using a long arc that kept them out of sensor range. The mission had worked perfectly. The Zalkran had no idea they had just been infected with a digital plague. Back on the flagship, Supreme Commander Vrath was trying to coordinate his scattered fleet. He sent orders to his 3 battle groups to regroup near Mars. The messages went out on the standard communication channels. But something strange started happening. Some ships received the orders immediately. Others received them an hour late. A few ships reported they never received the orders at all. Vrath sent the orders again. This time, different ships reported problems. His communication officers checked the systems. Everything appeared to be working normally. The delays made no sense. Then the sensor reports started getting confused. One battle group reported human ships in a sector that another battle group claimed was empty. A cruiser reported detecting a large human vessel near Venus. 3 other ships in the same area reported nothing there. Vrath demanded explanations. His officers had none. The sensors were working. The communications were working. But the information they provided kept contradicting itself. Vrath did not know that the virus was spreading through his fleet's network. Every ship that communicated with an infected ship became infected. The virus copied itself and moved from system to system. It was designed to create small problems. A message delayed by 30 minutes here. A sensor reading changed by a few percentage points there. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make the Zalkran think they were under attack. Just enough to create confusion and uncertainty. Greg Mason continued his attacks on the Zalkran picket ships. But now he noticed something different. The Zalkran responses were slower. Their formations were less tight. Ships that should have moved together were slightly out of position. He reported this to Danny Carter. Danny told him to keep up the pressure. The plan was working better than expected. Amy Sullivan watched the Zalkran fleet from her hidden position in the asteroid belt. Her sensors picked up increased communication traffic between Zalkran ships. They were arguing with each other. Commanders were demanding to know why their orders were not being followed. Ship captains were insisting they had never received those orders. The calm, disciplined fleet that had entered the solar system was starting to fracture. Amy sent her observations to Danny. She added a note. The Zalkran were getting frustrated. Frustrated enemies made mistakes. Danny received Amy's report and called Helen Crawford. He told her it was time to position the Earth fleet for the real battle. Helen had been waiting for this order. She took the Vigilant and the entire Earth defense fleet toward Mars. 43 ships against 200. On paper, it was still hopeless. But Danny was not fighting on paper. He was fighting in the minds of the Zalkran commanders. He was making them doubt. He was making them uncertain. He was making them afraid of an enemy they could not understand. Supreme Commander Vrath finally got his fleet regrouped near Mars. It had taken 12 hours longer than it should have. His officers were confused and angry. His communication systems kept having strange delays. His sensors kept reporting contacts that disappeared when investigated. Vrath looked at the tactical display. The human fleet was approaching. 43 ships. Finally something that made sense. Finally an enemy he could see and fight. He ordered his entire fleet to prepare for battle. He would crush these human ships and then move on to Earth. This embarrassing invasion would end now. He did not know that Danny Carter had been counting on exactly this decision. The Zalkran fleet was exactly where Danny wanted them. Confused, frustrated, and ready to charge forward without thinking. The trap was set. The Earth fleet hung in space near Mars like a small cluster of stars against the darkness. 43 ships arranged in a defensive formation that looked weak and desperate. Admiral Helen Crawford stood on the bridge of the Vigilant, watching the Zalkran fleet approach. 200 warships moving in 3 massive groups. Even with all of Danny's tricks and plans, the sight of that alien armada made her throat tight. If this did not work, humanity would be wiped out in the next few hours. Supreme Commander Vrath saw the human fleet on his display and felt relief wash over him. Finally something simple. Finally an enemy that made sense. 43 human ships in a defensive formation. No more phantom contacts, no more confusing sensor readings. Just a straightforward battle that he would win through superior numbers and firepower. He gave the order for his fleet to advance in standard attack formation. His ships moved forward in 3 precise groups, just like they had done in 100 battles before. Vrath expected this fight to be over in less than an hour. Danny Carter sat in the command center in Geneva watching the same tactical display that Helen saw. He had spent the last 3 weeks preparing for this exact moment. While the Zalkran had been dealing with fake ships and communication problems, human vessels had been quietly dropping thousands of objects throughout the space around Mars. Simple objects, tungsten rods about 2 meters long. Each one had a small thruster attached. Each one was in a dormant state that made it nearly invisible to sensors. The Zalkran had flown past hundreds of them without noticing. Now those rods were positioned along every approach route the Zalkran might use, thousands of them, waiting. Greg Mason commanded his squadron from the Defiant. His ships were positioned on the far right of the human formation. He watched the Zalkran fleet come closer. The alien ships were moving fast and confident. Their formation was tight and precise. It was exactly what Danny had predicted. The Zalkran always fought the same way. They relied on their formations to concentrate firepower. They never broke ranks. They never improvised. Greg checked his systems and waited for the signal. His finger hovered over the activation switch. The Zalkran fleet crossed into the engagement zone. They were now completely surrounded by the dormant tungsten rods, though they did not know it. Vrath ordered his ships to prepare to fire. His weapons officers locked onto the human vessels. In 30 seconds, the bombardment would begin. Vrath allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This invasion had been frustrating and strange, but it would end the way all his campaigns ended, with total victory. Greg Mason saw the signal light up on his console. It was a simple green dot. He pressed the activation switch. Throughout the space around Mars, thousands of tungsten rods came to life. Their thrusters ignited. Each rod began accelerating toward a precisely calculated point. The rods were not guided missiles. They had no tracking systems. They did not need them. Danny had calculated the Zalkran approach routes weeks ago. He knew they would use standard formations. He knew exactly where every ship would be. The rods simply flew toward those predetermined positions at incredible speed. The first rod hit a Zalkran cruiser on the port side. The rod was traveling at orbital velocity. It punched through the cruiser's hull like a bullet through paper. The ship's reactor containment failed. The cruiser exploded in a bright flash that lit up the darkness. 3 seconds later, another rod hit a different ship. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 50. The rods were hitting the Zalkran fleet from every angle. The aliens had no time to react. Their tight formations became death traps. Ships that were close together to concentrate firepower now crashed into each other, trying to avoid the incoming rods. Supreme Commander Vrath watched his fleet disintegrate in front of him. His display showed ship after ship going dark. Collision warnings screamed from every console, his communication channels filled with panicked reports from his captains. Ships were exploding. Ships were colliding. The formation was breaking apart. Vrath shouted orders, but nobody could hear him over the chaos. He tried to understand what was happening. Where were these weapons coming from? How were the humans launching so many attacks at once? His sensors showed nothing. No missiles, no ships, just impacts that came from nowhere. and destroyed everything they touched. A Zalkrin destroyer tried to break formation and escape the kill zone. It accelerated hard to port. A tungsten rod hit it directly in the engine section. The destroyer spun out of control and crashed into a supply ship. Both vessels exploded. A battlecruiser attempted to return fire at the human fleet. Before its weapons could charge, 3 rods hit it in sequence. The battlecruiser broke in half. Escape pods launched in every direction. The mighty Zalkrin fleet was being torn apart by an enemy they could not see or fight. Helen Crawford watched the carnage and felt no joy. War was never something to celebrate, but she had a job to do. She gave the order for the Earth fleet to advance. The human ships moved forward carefully. They did not charge into the chaos. They moved with precision. Helen had assigned specific targets to each ship. Not the biggest Zalkrin vessels. Not the most dangerous, but the most important. Command ships, communication relays, logistics support. The ships that held the fleet together. Lisa Brooks coordinated the targeting from her console. Each human ship fired on its assigned target. The attacks were not meant to destroy. They were meant to disable. To create more confusion, to make the Zalkrin fleet even more disorganized, a Zalkrin command ship tried to rally the fleet. Its captain broadcast orders on all channels. Get into defensive positions. Stop following the old formation. Spread out. But the virus that Nicole had uploaded was still working. Some ships received the orders. Others did not. Some ships received contradictory orders. The Zalkrin fleet could not coordinate. Every ship was making its own decisions. Some tried to fight. Some tried to run. Some just drifted in space with damaged systems. The disciplined armada had become a scattered mob. Kevin Torres brought his mining ships into the battle. Not to fight, but to rescue. His vessels moved through the debris field, pulling Zalkrin crew members from destroyed ships. Some Zalkrin fought back. Most were too shocked to resist. Kevin's crews brought them aboard and gave them medical treatment. The Zalkrin prisoners could not understand it. Their enemies were saving them. In their culture, defeated warriors were left to die. Mercy was weakness, but the humans kept rescuing them anyway. Wrath's flagship was hit by a tungsten rod that destroyed its main engines. The ship began to drift. Emergency power kicked in, but weapons and shields were offline. Wrath stood on his bridge in silence. Around him, his officers were trying to salvage what was left of the fleet. Reports came in slowly. Over half his ships were destroyed or disabled. The rest were scattered across millions of kilometers. His fleet no longer existed as a fighting force. He had lost. He had brought 200 ships to conquer a primitive world, and he had lost. It was impossible. It could not be happening, but it was. Greg Mason led his squadron through the wreckage. His job now was to identify any Zalkrin ships that were still capable of fighting and disable them. He did not want to destroy them, just make sure they could not threaten Earth. He found a Zalkrin battleship trying to restart its weapon systems. He fired a precise shot that destroyed the weapon arrays but left the ship intact. The battleship went dark. Its crew would live. Greg moved on to the next target. Amy Sullivan emerged from her hiding spot in the asteroid belt. Her stealth ship had recorded the entire battle. She compiled the data and sent it to Danny. Every tungsten rod impact, every human ship movement, every Zalkrin response. The information would be valuable for understanding what worked and what could be improved. But more than that, it was proof. Proof that humans could defeat a superior enemy through intelligence and creativity. Proof that overwhelming force was not the only path to victory. Danny Carter watched the battle end from his command center. The room was quiet. His officers sat at their stations exhausted. They had been awake for 3 days straight preparing for this moment. Now it was over. The Zalkrin fleet was broken. Earth was safe. But Danny felt no triumph. He felt tired. He had studied war his entire life. He understood it better than most people. But understanding war did not make it easier. He stood up and walked to the communications console. It was time to contact the Zalkrin. Time to see if they could be reasoned with. Time to find out if this victory would lead to peace or just more fighting. The battlefield near Mars was silent now except for the occasional crackle of damaged systems and the hiss of venting atmosphere. Debris from destroyed ships drifted in lazy orbits. Emergency beacons blinked in the darkness. Of the 200 warships that Supreme Commander Wrath had brought to conquer Earth, only 43 remained capable of any kind of movement. The rest were wrecks or debris fields. The numbers were a mirror image of what they had been at the start. The Zalkren had come with 200 ships to face 43 human vessels. Now the Zalkren had 43 ships left and faced 200 problems they never anticipated. Danny Carter opened a communication channel to the Zalkren flagship. He had Lisa Brooks translate his message into the Zalkren language. The message was simple and direct. Earth did not want the fighting to continue. Earth offered medical assistance to wounded Zalkren crew members. Earth offered to help recover survivors from destroyed ships. Earth proposed a meeting to discuss terms, not terms of surrender, terms of peace. The message went out on all frequencies. Then Danny waited. On the crippled flagship, Supreme Commander Vrath read the human message 3 times. He could not understand it. In his entire career and all the battles he had studied, in the entire 3,000-year history of the Zalkren Dominion, the defeated always surrendered or were destroyed. There was no third option. Yet here were the humans offering help to the very fleet that had come to conquer them. Vrath looked around his damaged bridge. His officers stared at him, waiting for orders. He had none. Every rule he knew had just been broken. Everything he believed about warfare had been proven wrong. He sat in his command chair and tried to think. Helen Crawford ordered her fleet to begin rescue operations. Human ships moved through the debris field scanning for Zalkren life signs. When they found survivors, they brought them aboard. The Zalkren prisoners were confused and frightened. Some refused treatment. Some fought against the humans trying to help them, but most simply sat in shocked silence. They could not process what had happened. Their fleet had been invincible. Their tactics had been perfect. Their weapons had been superior, yet they had lost. Not to stronger weapons, but to something they never considered a weapon. Human thinking. Kevin Torres brought his mining ships alongside a damaged Zalkren cruiser. The ship was venting atmosphere and losing power. Kevin's crew cut through the hull and pulled out 63 Zalkren crew members. Half were injured. Kevin's medical team treated them all. The Zalkren medic in the group watched in amazement as humans used their own medical supplies to save Zalkren lives. The medic asked why. Why would they help the enemy? Kevin's answer was simple. Because you are not our enemy anymore. The battle is over. Now we help each other survive. Nicole Wright returned to the command center in Geneva. She was exhausted but satisfied. Her mission had worked perfectly. The virus had disrupted the Zalkren fleet at exactly the right moment. But now she had another job. Danny needed someone to lead the diplomatic team that would meet with the Zalkren. Nicole was good at reading people and situations. She could adapt to new circumstances quickly. Danny trusted her to handle first contact with a species that had just learned they were not invincible. 8 hours after the battle ended, Vrath finally responded to Danny's message. He agreed to a meeting, not because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. His fleet was destroyed. His crew was scattered. His mission was a failure. He had to face the consequences. The meeting would take place on neutral ground, a small asteroid halfway between Earth and Mars. Vrath would bring 2 officers. The humans could bring the same. No weapons, no guards. Just talk. Danny chose Nicole Wright and Amy Sullivan to accompany him. Nicole because she understood people. Amy because she had observed the Zalkren fleet for weeks and understood how they thought. The 3 of them took a small shuttle to the asteroid. A temporary habitat module had been set up there. Basic life support, a table, some chairs. Nothing fancy. Danny did not want to intimidate or impress. He wanted to communicate. Vrath arrived with 2 of his senior captains. The Zalkren were taller than humans and had gray-scaled skin and 3 eyes. They moved carefully in the low gravity. Vrath looked tired. His uniform was dirty and torn. He had not changed since the battle. He sat down at the table and looked directly at Danny. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Vrath asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the battle ended. How did you do it? How did a primitive species with inferior technology defeat the greatest fleet in the Dominion? Danny leaned back in his chair. He explained that Earth did not win because of technology. Earth won because humans had spent thousands of years learning how to fight enemies that were bigger and stronger than them. Humans had studied warfare not as a matter of force, but as a matter of thinking. Every great human victory in history came from understanding the enemy better than the enemy understood themselves. The Zalkren had assumed strength was enough. They had assumed their way of fighting was the only way that mattered. That assumption was their weakness. Vrath listened without interrupting. When Danny finished, Vrath asked what would happen now. Would Earth demand tribute? Would they take Zalkrin prisoners as slaves? Would they invade Zalkrin space to claim territory? Danny shook his head. Earth wanted none of those things. Earth wanted only to be left alone. Humans had no interest in building an empire. They just wanted to live in peace and explore their own part of the galaxy. But if anyone threatened Earth again, they would respond the same way, not with bigger weapons, but with better thinking. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, they had reached an agreement. The Zalkrin would leave the solar system. They would report to their emperor that humans were not a species to be conquered. In exchange, Earth would return all Zalkrin prisoners and help repair enough ships to get the survivors home. There would be no victory parades, no demands for reparations, just a simple understanding. Humans and Zalkrin would leave each other alone. News of the battle spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Other empires heard about the Zalkrin defeat and began reassessing their opinions about Earth. The species that had seemed primitive and weak had just destroyed one of the most powerful fleets in known space. Ambassadors from a dozen different civilizations sent messages to Earth requesting diplomatic relations. They all said the same thing. They wanted to understand how humans thought. They wanted to learn from the species that had changed the rules of warfare. Greg Mason returned to Earth a hero, though he did not feel like one. He had followed orders and done his job. The real victory belonged to Danny Carter and his plan. Greg gave dozens of interviews to news organizations. He told them all the same thing. Humans won because they refused to accept that strength was destiny. They won because they thought about the problem differently than anyone expected. That ability to think in new ways was humanity's greatest weapon. Amy Sullivan submitted her final report on the Zalkrin fleet movements. The data would be studied for years by military strategists across Earth. But Amy was already thinking about the future. Now that humanity had proven themselves in battle, what would they do with peace? She hoped humans would use their creativity for exploration and discovery, instead of war. She hoped this victory would be the beginning of something better. Helen Crawford stood on the bridge of the Vigilant and watched the last Zalkrin ships leave the solar system. They moved slowly, damaged but functional enough to make the journey home. She felt relieved. The war was over. Earth was safe. But she also felt something else: responsibility. The galaxy now knew what humans could do. Other species would test them. Other conflicts would arise. Earth needed to be ready not just with weapons but with the same creative thinking that had won this battle. Danny Carter sat alone in his office in Geneva. The command center had been shut down. His team had gone home to rest. He stared at a screen showing messages from around the world. People calling him a genius, a savior, a hero. Danny did not feel like any of those things. He felt like someone who had studied history and applied the lessons. The real heroes were the people who had executed the plan. The pilots who flew into danger. The engineers who built the drones. The soldiers who rescued enemy crew members when they could have left them to die. Supreme Commander Vrath spent the long journey home thinking about everything that had happened. He read human military history that the humans had provided. Books about ancient battles and famous generals. Strategies that were thousands of years old but still effective. He realized that the Zalkrin had become lazy. They had relied on their strength for so long that they had forgotten how to adapt. They had forgotten that the strongest army does not always win. Sometimes the smartest army wins. It was a lesson that would change the Dominion forever. The battle near Mars became known across the galaxy as the day humanity announced itself to the universe. Not with threats or demands. Not with conquest or empire building. But with proof that intelligence and creativity were worth more than any weapon. Other species began studying human culture and history. They wanted to understand the minds that had defeated the Zalkrin. What they found surprised them. Humans were not unique because they were stronger or smarter than other species. Humans were unique because they had spent their entire history learning how to overcome opponents who had every advantage. That experience had prepared them for the galaxy in ways no one expected. Earth entered a new era. They built more ships and trained more officers. But they also built schools to study strategy and creativity. They understood that their victory had not come from luck. It came from thinking differently. That ability would define humanity's role in the galaxy for centuries to come. The species that could not match others in strength would lead in innovation. The species that started with nothing would teach the galaxy that sometimes the greatest power was not in weapons, but in minds that refused to accept limitations.